All right, so good evening again, everyone, and thank you for joining this AAJA-Asia Digital Salon. We will speak today of the state of press freedom in Asia, and for this, we are very pleased to have with us uh, Beh Lih Yi, who is the regional director of for Asia Pacific of the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. So Lih Yi has been a press freedom advocate for over 20 years, and before joining, she's originally from Malaysia, and before joining CPJ, she has worked for Malaysia Kini and AFP, Agence France Presse, and the Thomson Reuters Foundation. So she's an experienced journalist and press freedom advocate. So thank you for joining us, Lee. Very pleased to welcome you tonight.
Thank
And
you for having me.
all right. So before we hear from you some highlights from the latest CPJ report about imprisoned journalists, I wanted to ask you if you can give us maybe a few words of introduction about CPJ, and then tell us about about some background information about this report. How is it made? What is the methodology? And why? What is the goal for bringing this report?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jules. And thanks again for having me. And it's great to see some familiar names on this call as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share one of our key work in CPJ, which is to advocate for the release of our imprisoned colleagues. So in terms of CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, we are a global organization that dedicated to defend press freedoms and the right to report safely without reprisal. Our headquarters is in New York, but we have experts who are based around the world, including in Asia, different parts of Asia. CPJ has been around for more than 40 years. And is widely regarded, of course, as one of the leading organizations working on press freedom. Our CPJ annual prison census is one of the key flagship report put out by CPJ every year. We started keeping records of journalists who are in prison since 1992. As you can imagine, it's a long time. This is a snapshot of journalists who are jailed globally for their work as of midnight on December 1st. It includes those journalists CPJ has confirmed to be imprisoned in relations to their reporting and their work. So this is, I want to emphasize, this report refers to journalists who are in prison because of their work. And the census that, of course, we will discuss later, does not, we will go into details later, does not include the many journalists who are imprisoned and released throughout the year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for this introduction. So I know you have a few slides to present the highlights from the report. So let me bring up the slides. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Should I start?
Yes, please. Go ahead and let me know when you want to switch to the next slide.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot again, Jules. And I promise everyone that there are only a few slides. I don't like present PowerPoint myself as slide, so there are just a few key sort of figures that I wanted to talk through with you today at the start. And of course, I look forward to hearing your questions and also to learn from you as well, some of your own experience in the country that I'm really looking forward to. And of course, in the next few minutes, we will be discussing some numbers and datas of those imprisoned. But I wanted to make it very clear that, this report, what we are trying to focus on and highlight is not only the journalists who are imprisoned, the 330 journalists who are in prisons that you will be hearing today. What we are trying to highlight is that this is the broader attack on press freedom. Um, the broader attack on our right to information and on our right to do our job as journalists. So the 330 journalists who are in prisons are emblematic of this broader attack on journalism across the world, across many parts in the Asia region for that reason. And in terms of the highlight of this year, the prison census report, you will see in the first slide just now that there are more than 300 journalists were behind bar at the end of last year. And this is the fifth consecutive year that we are seeing more than 300 journalists were behind bars. And the last year, it was 330 journalists who were imprisoned in connections to their work. This is the third highest number since CPJ began keeping record, just below the record number of 384 that we recorded at the end of 2024. And in terms of the worst offenders of jailing journalists, China, Myanmar, Israel, and Russia and Belarus, you can see on the list here. Of course, they are two Asian countries high on the list. And for China, China has maintained its status as the world's worst jailer of journalists for the third year in a row, with 50 imprisoned at the end of last year, including 7 in Hong Kong. And our research has shows that China routinely use anti-state charges to target journalists. So things like espionage, spying, inciting subversion of state power. And this trend of using anti-state charges, of course, is also replicated throughout the 2025, the global cases that we are seeing in some other parts of the world. More than 60% of them of journalists who are in prisons are held on anti-state charges. And for Myanmar, for last year, Myanmar rose to the second worst jailer from third in the year before, with 30 journalists held imprisoned. And this, of course, we are continuing. We see those situations in Myanmar continue to worsen since the 2021 coup. And we can move to the next slide. And this slide give you a sense of, some of the other top jailer of journalists. Of course, you will see from the chart, sorry, maybe this is a bit small, that there is Vietnam as well. That is also on the top 10. Vietnam, of course, is also one of the worst jailer of journalists across the world, with 16 held behind bars at the end of last year. And despite we are seeing also deepening repressions with recent changes, law that was passed that will have very wide ranging implications on press freedom. If you could move to the next slide. And again, Asia has more journalists imprisoned than any other region in the world, with 110 behind bar at the end of last year. And 110 is 1/3 of the overall global total. So of course, this is something very, very concerning because we are looking across the region. It's not only the autocratic regimes that target journalists, but we are also looking at democracies like the Philippines and India, who has journalists behind bars in their respective countries. And the majority of the journalists who are imprisoned, as at the end of last year, are journalists who cover politics. And maybe I can also just give a little breakdown also on some other countries which has journalists imprisoned, apart from China, Myanmar, Vietnam that you heard about just now. We are also seeing journalists in prisons in other countries in the region, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. I think that is my very high level highlights of our prison census report. Of course, all the details about our prison census, you can see it on our website, which is www.cpj.org.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Lee, for this high level view. So, as you said, I mean, this number of imprisoned journalists is kind of a marker of the state of press freedom. It's just obviously one indicator. Um, does CPJ monitors, other markers such as like the number of journalists killed or those facing legal proceedings or impunity on crimes? I mean, I think all these other criteria we can follow to assess the state of press freedom.
Yeah, certainly, Jules. As we always say, the jailing of journalists is one of the key indicators of the media environment in the country, but that's not all. We routinely monitor other key indicators, for instance, the journalists who are killed in the line of duty, so that we produce another flagship CPJ report that we produce every year is the impunity report that we put out on November 2nd, around the day of the International Day to End Impunity on Violence Against Journalists. That is again one of the flagship report that CPJ put out. We also, of course, monitor the legislative environment for journalists who are targeted to various other measures, including lawsuits or detentions. As I say again, the imprisoned report is a snapshot of journalists who are imprisoned on December 1st. It does not include journalists who are detained and released throughout the years. So those reports, we report them immediately and put out our alerts and statements to raise immediate alarm about what's going on there.
Mhm. Perfect, thanks. So what you mentioned, I mean, obviously, when we see that China is the higher offender, Myanmar, obviously, we know, I mean, sadly, about the junta and the coup that happened a few years ago. So it's not surprising in a way. But you mentioned that what is also a high concern, although the numbers of journalists in jail is not as high, but it's to see that even in countries that consider themselves as democracies, there are some journalists in behind the bars, and you mentioned the Philippines, and so we know that in the Philippines precisely. I mean, for many years, I mean, we followed, the legal proceedings against Maria Ressa and under the Duterte, but the Marcos administration came and like kind of showed a more like tempered approach towards journalism or more open approach. And however, last week Frenchie Mae Cumpio was convicted to up to 18 years of jail, and this is the case that I know CPJ has been following and advocating for many years. Could you tell us a bit about this case and what it's about and what is the current situation?
Yeah, I have just returned from the Philippines I was in the Philippines last week in the Eastern Philippines in Tacloban to monitor the trial of Frenchie Mae Cumpio personally in court. And as you mentioned, he is the only journalist who remains imprisoned in the Philippines. And she had been in detention for nearly 6 years, even though she has not been convicted of any crime. So last week in court, she was acquitted of one charge of illegal possessions of firearms, but she was convicted on the other charge, which is on financing terrorism. And of course, this is something that to CPJ, this is something unacceptable. It's outrageous because Frenchie Mae Cumpio has a track record as a journalist, a community journalist who report very, very closely about, what happened in her community in Tacloban, where there was, if you remember, there was Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines more than 10 years ago. So she was reporting about the reconstructions, and what happened to the farmers. She was reporting on alleged police and military abuses. But for that, she was targeted. She was labeled. She was red tag. She was under surveillance, harassed, red tag during the Duterte era, and she was then put in detention for 6 years. And her trial moved very, very slowly. It took about 4 years before she was even given a chance to testify in court to defend herself. And of course, an undue delay the right to be tried is something that is guaranteed under the international law. So when there's undue delay, it's a violation of international law. And it's a case that CPJ, when I was on the ground about 3 years ago on the missions, at that time, there was no one know about who is Frenchie Mae Cumpio. But her case was such a strong case to illustrate, what is emblematic of the challenges that we face as journalists today. Because very often you are smeared in terms of what you do as a journalist. The authorities will go out all their way to tarnish your reputations. They label you as terrorists, as communists. And in the case last week, what's more concerning for us is that it's such a precedent because it's the first journalist who is detained and convicted under counterterrorism law, and that is very, very concerning because it's something that we don't expect to see coming out from the Philippines, which is a vibrant democracy, the chair of ASEAN this year, but the use of terror laws against journalists is putting the Philippines in the same league with countries like Russia and Myanmar. That, of course, is very concerning to us.
Of course, because it's because as all these laws that are targeting or weaponized against journalists, it has a very broad focus. It's what constitutes terrorism. It's really like there's a lot of arbitrary aspect to how it's qualified, and moreover, in the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio, the evidence that is brought against her are completely. Are seriously questioned. I mean, there's been investigations, and our lawyers presented kind of elements showing that they had been planted or that they were completely trumped charges, right?
Correct. As if you look closely at the proceeding, and this is not just a concern raised by CPJ, but also by the expert like the Clooney Foundation for Justice have raised questions around the many questions around prosecutions. They were, allegations of the weapons were planted when the police raided their place in 2020, which led to their arrest. And if you look at, the charges against Frenchie was that she and her co-accused supply things like cash, munitions, and long pants to the communist insurgents in the mountains in the Philippines. But all this case was built based on just testimony from some so-called rebel returnees. There was no photographic evidence or any sort of evidence that was tendered in court. So we are again, very, very concerned because how could you put someone in jail just based on a stories or a testimony, provided by a number of four people? So that is again, it goes to show how ridiculous this case is.
Yeah, absolutely, and it showed the importance to fight it, obviously to support and to Frenchie Mae Cumpio and to free someone who's clearly innocent, but also because it's important for other journalists in the future who could be attacked using the same law and with impunity, right? Apart from this particular case, that CPJ has played an important role in putting out there and attracting attention to Uh, what are the other like very like I would say notorious or important cases that you are currently focusing on? Maybe some of them that might be about famous people, but maybe there are some cases that are not as well known and that would be worth precisely be better known so that we can also express solidarity and put pressure on the governments that are keeping these journalists in jail.
Yeah, no, I think thanks for bringing up the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio just now, Jules. Of course, that conviction was just handed down last week, so it's something that I am sure many colleagues here on this call will have seen in the news headline. But her case is also emblematic of the weaponizations of the law, which is one of the key, if I look at the press freedom trends in Asia, it's one of the three key trends, I would say, impacting journalists across the regions, but also, elsewhere in the world, is the weaponizations of the law. Using things like national security charges to go after journalists, terrorism charges, in the case of not just Frenchie, but also, of course, in the case of, say, Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, who has just been convicted in December in a very landmark national security case. He's now facing a maximum sentence of life imprisonment, and at 78 years old and in poor health, he's almost certain to die behind bars. So again, that is a case that CPJ has been advocating for his freedom right from the start, because what is happening to Jimmy Lai is not just about Jimmy Lai. It represents the very dramatic decline of the media and press freedom environment in Hong Kong overnight. So I used to work as a foreign correspondent in Hong Kong. I have experienced that freedoms, coming from a place like Malaysia more than 15 years ago to go to Hong Kong. I see how, what journalists can do when you have press freedom. So Jimmy Lai's case, one of the very key case that also highlights the challenges of what journalists elsewhere in the region is facing. Again, on using national security charges to go after journalists, we have another case in China, Dong Yuyu, who is a very veteran Chinese journalist who is currently serving a 7-year prison sentence in Beijing on the charge of espionage, only because he had lunch with a Japanese diplomat. Again, it's something that as journalists, you and I know that this is routine, a kind of routine interactions that we have with different sources, with different diplomats and different community. But for that, he was accused of being a spy. And again, that is something that's unacceptable to us. It's outrageous. So we are again, advocating for his release, and we just awarded Dong with the CPJ International Press Freedom Award at the end of last year in recognitions of his dedications to journalism. He was just 2 months away from his retirement when he was arrested in Beijing over this lunch with a diplomat. And in terms of weaponization of the law, we are seeing, of course, the increasing use of charges like financial and tax charges, administrative charges to go after journalists. Not only in the case of Maria Ressa, who many of you know, was accused of breaking tax law in the Philippines, and of course they have been acquitted now after a very long fight. But also we saw the same kind of weaponizations of those tax charges being used in Hong Kong, that the Hong Kong authorities launched tax audits on journalists and the Hong Kong Journalists Associations as well. The second, if I have just 2 minutes to go through this, also just to say, one thing we are very, very concerned, of course, is also the transnational repression that we are seeing in terms of press freedom's environment in Asia, because increasingly, journalists are not only being targeted when they are reporting from their countries, even though when they are abroad, the long arm of this punishment is also being extended abroad. Just earlier this year, we saw in Pakistan a number of journalists, Pakistani journalists who are based abroad, were convicted in Pakistan for their coverage over the protests related to the former Prime Minister Imran Khan a few years ago. This is very, very concerning to us because they are not only punishing journalists who are targeting journalists who are in Pakistan, they are also convicting journalists who are based abroad. Similarly, we're seeing in Afghanistan, the Taliban are also increasingly trying to target journalists who are reporting for exile media. So this transnational repression is something certainly that CPJ is working very closely to raise the awareness and also to raise the alarm. And the last thing where we are very concerned in terms of trend is that the actors and governments are trying to erode public trust in journalism. As you mentioned in the event blurb, that the trust in public journalism is really, being challenged. But we are seeing the same narrative across the region where government is trying to portray journalism not as a public good. In the case of India, we see quite recently that government basically revoked the tax status of some non-profit newsroom by saying that journalism is not a public good. So again, these are some of the cases that we are following very closely. Some of the trends that we are trying to raise the alarm. So as journalist community, we know how to fight back.
Yeah, thanks for that, and for evoking these preoccupying trends. I think that when you mention fact that some governments are attacking journalists who are covering them even when they are abroad, and we are also seeing, I think, a trend of journalists who are in exile and governments kind of attack their families who are back home, right? I think it's something that is unfortunately common as well.
Yeah, definitely. We have documented a number of cases, especially on journalists who are Bangladeshi journalists who are based overseas, but their family were being targeted back home. So it's yeah, exactly. This is a trend that we are seeing, on the rise across the region.
Okay. So, I mean, many of the examples you gave was about China and Hong Kong. So we're going to start to take questions from the participants, and I mean, and they took the trouble to write their question in the chat, but I actually would like to invite them to express directly, to ask directly their questions. So maybe we could start with Hamad. Hamad, you wanted to ask some questions that are about China and beyond.
Hi, thanks for giving me the chance to speak. I think we talk a lot about China filling its jails with journalists, but also China is running this silent campaign around the world wherever it's investing money heavily in infrastructure and countries, more specifically, speaking of countries that have flawed democracies, such as Pakistan. There are unwritten rules where we cannot criticize or carry out critical reporting of China's projects and its impacts on the environment or climate. Absolute silence in our newsrooms of any criticism of China. What does the CPJ think about these, moves that Beijing has silently sort of been able to impose in countries with flawed democracies and poor media rights?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that questions. Of course, I think it's something that we are watching closely, and in terms of exactly the phenomenon that you mentioned just now with the investment in some of the countries where the media develop media maybe media scene maybe a little undeveloped. Of course, I think what we like to advocate here, of course, is going back to all the countries that we work closely with. I think CPJ, I am representing the Asia region, of course, but I have colleagues say who are based in Africa. Of course, they continuously raise the alarm on some of the issues that you just pointed out in terms of the investment and map the impact of what this means for press freedoms and for the right of journalists to report freely. And so that is something that we are watching.
Thank you, Lee. So moving on from China to Singapore, there's a question about Singapore from Helena. Helena, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to ask. Hi, thank you for your presentation, Lee. When it comes to freedom of press, there are different types of persecutions. Incarceration is visible imprisonment. However, imprisonment takes different forms, right? And it can be so that, we stop truth telling. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be behind bars, is what I'm trying to say. So does CPJ keep a running record of reporting that are sensitive in nature, including terrorism, financing, money laundering, transnational involvements, as well as Singapore's a list of reporting and reporters, persecutions against them? And as for you, Lee, a personal question. As a journalist from Malaysia, what are your challenges in reporting the truth behind the multi-billion-dollar high-level cases? And what's stopping journalists from a full spread reporting into the cases? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that questions, and I'm also very glad to hear questions about Singapore because is of course is sometimes one of the most underreported countries in terms of press freedom because of how complex you just pointed out in terms of the environment. And of course, at the start, I say that imprisonment is only one of the indicators of a press freedom environment in the country. It's not all the indicators. We also look at other things in terms of killing of journalists, self-censorship. The environment, the legislative framework that allows journalists to do their job freely and safely. And of course, Singapore will fall under some of those categories of what I just mentioned, although it may not be imprisonment, may not be killing, but there are certainly a host of other issues that we at CPJ continue to raise the alarm, including, I think quite recently we have seen Singapore officials trying to threaten to take legal actions against media outlets, including things like demanding the corrections of certain reports. Again, we are seeing in Singapore that bloggers comes under pressure for allegedly defame the former prime minister. So those are some of the things that we monitor. So again, I think we understand when it comes to documenting some of these press freedom violations. One of the challenge that we face in Asia, not just in Singapore, is of course, the censorship, that either it comes from the state or self-censorship. So take the case of China again, that we are seeing you can see in our report that there are 50 journalists behind bar, but we have always been very clear that this number, 50 journalists behind bars in China, at the end of last year is likely to be an undercount because very often due to the pervasive censorship and mass surveillance, family or lawyers or employers are too afraid to speak up. So in many cases, we cannot document. And in many cases, the numbers that we shows is also just a tip of the iceberg. And sorry, can you repeat your second question again? I just lose my mic because lose my thought on that. Is it on how as a Malaysian reporter how
Yeah, what are your challenges? Because you're native Malaysian, yes, and you've worked for the wires also. So, what are your challenges given your local as well as international exposure that you face in reporting the multi-billion dollar high-level cases that remain very underreported? And what is stopping journalists, yeah, like yourself and your international cohort or colleagues, from a full spread reporting into the cases, into investigative reporting, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, thank you.
I'll just start by saying I over the last 10 years or so I haven't actually closely worked in Malaysia. So I guess the billion dollar scandal that you are talking about referring to is the one MDB scandal. That when that happened, I was already a journalist working overseas in Asia, so I did not cover that. But I would tell you, when I became a journalist in Malaysia more than 20 years ago for an outfit like Malaysia Kini, which is an independent newsroom, of course, there were a lot of challenges. And intimidations that we face. The police would show up at my house at night to serve me a court summons to summon me to court to testify because of my reporting. The police would raid our newsroom in Malaysia Kini and took away our computer. And many times we were kicked out from press conferences, from official events because they say we don't recognize you as a journalist. So those were the days that you are talking about 20 years ago, where the media environment in Malaysia was quite different than today. But of course, I think it took a lot of persistence from everyone, not just from Malaysia Kini. Of course, Malaysia Kini was the first online newsroom, first independent newsroom in Malaysia, but many other online newsroom that was set up after Malaysia Kini. It took the collective persistence from everyone to continue to report what's happening, continue to hold officials to account for what they are doing. That collectively resulted in the first change of government in Malaysia in 2018. And of course, after that, I think, as you know, Malaysia now, the environment has improved compared to what it was 20 years ago. But the fight for press freedom is always constant. We are still seeing challenges coming out from Malaysia. Very recently, there was a journalist who was arrested for asking questions under the Sedition Act, which is a very colonial act that should have been abolished by this government that came into power on a reform platform. So I would say, it took a lot of persistence in holding, in doing the journalism and in continue to hold the line.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, I'm really always interested to see how things are changing in Malaysia. You know that Malaysia was the first country where I I lived in Asia, so I'm always interested in hearing how things are going. Obviously, the all this monitoring work that CPJ does is to intend to put pressure on governments and to improve the situation of journalists working globally and in the region. So it's important that we focus as well not only on the monitoring side, but what we can do to improve things. And so Jay Ganglani has a question precisely about that. Jay, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, Lee, firstly for doing this presentation and taking the time to speak to us. Uh, so my question was pretty simple, actually. Based on the report, are there countries or regions in the world that have actually improved in recent years in the sense that they've had fewer reporters jailed? And I guess a follow-up to that was, if so, how have they improved and what can we sort of take away from their success stories? Thank you.
Okay, I am usually an optimist. I am an optimist, and I like to see things improve. But I would say again, is really hard. What we are dealing with is always a one step forward, three step back situation when it comes to press freedom. When we see countries have improved, say in the case of the Philippines again, because we talked at length just now on the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio. Of course, we saw that things improve in the Philippines compared to the last President Duterte, when there was outright, hostility toward the media, threatening,
Can I sit at the bar area?
threat on the media. But again, we are still seeing journalists in prison. So it's really hard to measure improvement in that sense. But I like to, of course, think, where we are seeing in Asia is that the fight for democracy is alive and kicking. There is a very strong traditions to fight for democracy across the regions. We are just seeing, 2 years ago that Bangladesh had the change of government, where the Syed Hasina's governments were ousted after many years of being in power, and where the media was, there was really deep media repression in Bangladesh. And the media, of course, play a very strong role in that, in keeping the reporting going, even though there was massive protests in Bangladesh where people were killed. We saw the change of government again, also in the case of Nepal. In South Korea, we saw quite recently, a year ago or so, that there was attempt martial law to be in. An attempt of martial law to be introduced. Again, the media was very strong and holding the line. And all this, I think there is the fight for democracy is alive and kicking in Asia. And the press, of course, play an essential role in all this.
Thank you. So it's actually, very, very good to be optimistic. And to be an optimist when you work as a journalist and supporting journalism, because there are so many also negative things happening that you have to keep the faith and keep fighting back. So there's a question from Lee, but if you don't mind, Lee, I will just summarize your question, because it's about Frenchie Mae Cumpio, and we already spoke quite extensively about this case. But beyond this case, so what Lee is saying is that probably Frenchie Mae Cumpio was targeted, or could be targeted, because she was a community journalist. She was not protected by a strong institution, and therefore, going back to what I was asking before, what can we do as a community of journalists? What can we do to support journalists in the region and beyond advocating for press freedom and denouncing these attacks against press freedom? But what else can we do to support and improve the situation?
Your solidarity matters. As a community, we can do a lot. As I always say, we have the strongest weapon to fight back, which is our journalism. And every time when our colleagues in the media report on what's happening, report on our colleagues who are imprisoned or killed because of their work, we make sure that they are not forgotten. We honor their work, and we make sure that even though they are imprisoned, we continue to speak their name, to continue that their memory, the work that they do are not erased from the public memory, because sometimes this is what governments trying to do. They lock you away, put you away in prisons, behind bars, so people, you are out of sight, out of mind. But your reporting, again, to answer to Lee's questions, is that the the reporting that came out from the Philippines over the last 3 years that I have seen, I started working on this case, is that, that solidarity matters. And there is also strength in numbers when we can, collectively report on some of these cases, investigate what's happening, holding the officials to account for what they are doing, asking them why they are doing. That is very powerful, a very, very powerful gesture of solidarity. So, I think, of course, when I talk about the state of press freedom in Asia, is always a very dire pictures, especially Asia is the region with the highest number of journalists in prison. But that also goes to show how powerful the journalism that we are doing in this region in Asia, and how nervous the government are. That's why they are increasingly cracking down on the reporting. But by standing together, there's so much we could do to fight back on this, and silence is really not an option.
Absolutely. Thank you for this. So we still have like 10 minutes. So I think we'll have time for one or two last questions, and then we have a video, if we have time to, that we like a CPJ video we would like to play at the end. There was a question going back on transnational repression that is sent by Wulan from Indonesia. Wulan, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Gilles, and also Lih Yi. So recently I read about the case of Diego Andres Rosa Rosales. He's a Salvadoran journalist who is seeking refuge in Spain. He was detained by Spanish police after an Interpol red notice was issued at the request of the Salvadoran government. So, but finally, Spain's judge ordered his release. So this case sparked my curiosity regarding transnational repression. What CPJ has observed in general, and is there any government in Asia that misuse Interpol red notice to target journalists who have sought refuge in exile? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Wulan. Good to hear you online. I am not familiar with the specific case that you just mentioned, so I don't think I can go into details about that. And in terms of whether we have documented any misuse of the Interpol red notices to target journalists, I have, just off the top of my mind, I don't think we have any recent cases, although, I will be happy to check and get back to you on that. But in terms of, transnational repression, of course, it's something, as I say just now, that we are seeing on the rise across the region, not just impacting journalists who are based abroad. Some of them sometimes are journalists with dual citizenships. Like in the case of Pakistan, they are journalists who are British Pakistani based abroad being targeted when they are abroad, or Bangladeshi journalists, with their family back home being targeted. But also we are looking at journalists who live in exile, who are abroad being targeted by the government. So again, that transnational repression is something that we are seeing happening in Asia, impacting journalists of Asian origin, but also, on the rise elsewhere in the world, say, like Iranian journalists who live in exile in the UK have been targeted and face harassment as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. I think that answers Wulan's question. Is there one very last question? Okay, if not, because we still have a few minutes, so then we'll have time to play this short video, so let me play the video, and then we'll come back to say a few words of conclusion.
CPJ documented a total of 330 journalists behind bars globally in connection with their work on December 1st, 2025. 5 journalists from around the world who were released from prison in recent years spoke with CPJ about the experiences they survived, illustrating the dire conditions our colleagues who remain behind bars experience in silence.
I'm a Chinese Australian journalist imprisoned by the Ministry of State Security.
I was jailed multiple times because of my journalism works.
Fui preso político por la dictadura de Daniel Ortega.
Который больше чем 4 года находился в заключении в российской тюрьме.
A mí me arrestaron precisamente el 6 de abril de ese año, simplemente por haberle dado cobertura a una actividad religiosa que en ese momento y aún siguen prohibidas en nuestro país.
كنت أنقل صورة معاناة الناس من داخل مجمع الشفاء الطبي. لما رفعت إيدي ودخلت على المحقق قال ليش بتشتغل؟ قلت له أنا اسمي شادر سيدي وبشتغل صحفي. قال لي صحفي؟ قال لي وكأنه الصحافة تهمة. كبر يدي وغمى عيني وأول ما غمى عيني وكبر يدي كسر لي هنا ريشة. هذا استقبال.
I was kept in a bare padded cell with the lights always on, the curtains always closed, made to sit on the edge of a hard bed for 13 hours a day, watched at all times by teams of 2 guards who sat and stood very close to me. It was dehumanizing, utterly isolating, and painful.
Я общался с многими людьми в заключении, и больше чем 90% они проходили через пытки и издевательства.
I thought I was forgotten, and no one would care if I would be killed by soldiers anytime. I was really fortunate to be out to the rest of the world, but still colleagues are behind bars, and they need voices.
Я считаю, что мы все должны сделать все для того, чтобы эти люди вернулись.
Dictatorships hate international attention on their restrictive and punitive, arbitrary, and just unjust practices. So, as defiance to their secrecy, we make everything open. We publicize people's plight. We make the prisoners feel they are not forgotten. They are not alone.
No pueden encarcelar a la verdad. No pueden matar a la verdad. Callar no es una opción.
Well, thanks for sharing this video with us, Lee. It's always moving to hear directly from journalists who have been imprisoned about their experience, and very important to share this message that silence is not an option, and that solidarity matters.
Yeah. Thanks a lot to AAJA and Gilles, for organizing this. Yes, silence is not an option, and your solidarity matters. So thank you for giving me and CPJ this opportunity to share some of the challenges that our colleagues face, and because without press freedom, there is no journalism.
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you everyone for joining and contributing to this session with your questions. Bye.